Well, it's fast-tracked because there's no trial, at least not one we would recognize from our legal system. According to reporting by Phoebe Nathanson and Ann Wise for ABC News, quote, a fast-track trial procedure calls for an immediate decision based on the evidence already represented to the court and allows for a reduction of an eventual guilty sentence by 1/3, end quote.
Oh, okay. So that's why he wants a fast track.
Yeah, the reduced sentence is definitely part of the appeal for a defendant. But Rudy's lawyers are hoping the verdict will come back not guilty anyway. They definitely part of the appeal for a defendant. But Rudy's lawyers are hoping the verdict will come back not guilty anyway. They say that their client had nothing to do with the murder and that there are other possible scenarios that would explain the evidence at the scene.
You mean his strange man in the hallway story?
Yeah, that he just happened to be in her bathroom when some random guy broke in and killed her. But by the time the judge starts looking at the case, the evidence against Rudy is overwhelming. He admitted to being in the room with Meredith while she lay dying. He admitted to fleeing the country within 2 days of the murder. Those skin cells found inside Meredith's body, those were found to belong to Rudy. His handprint was on the pillow under her body. The shoe print left in blood at the scene matched his shoes, and police also found his DNA on Meredith's purse, which contained the only items missing from the house that night.
Listen, I hate to ask this question, but it's kind of been bugging me since you mentioned it, all the way at the top of this episode. The poop in the toilet. Was that his too?
Yes, it was. And I mean, again, Rudy said that it was a result of a questionable kebab, right? Like, even in his version, like he left it there. But John Douglas and Mark Olshaker, who wrote a chapter in The Forgotten Killer, say otherwise. In fact, they say it's actually not that unusual for a burglar or a robber to have to relieve themselves during the course of a break-in.
Okay, what?
Yeah, and listen, I keyed in on this right away since I remember the conversation we had earlier this year when we covered the Setagaya murders in Japan, because the same thing happened. The suspect left poop in the toilet there as well. And we were both like, couldn't wrap our heads around it, but apparently it's just like nerves or stress or something.
Okay, I mean, that and or the kebab explains why he pooped, but not why he left it there.
Well, the theory John Douglas puts forward in the book is that Rudy was basically in the middle of this break-in when the urge hit. So he stopped what he was doing to go to the bathroom, and he was either just finishing up or about to finish up when Meredith came home that night. So I think he's putting forward that this was just supposed to be a burglary, but then Meredith potentially came home and interrupted the progress of it. And so he couldn't just like flush it down. She'd know he was there. He needed time to figure out how he was going to get from the bathroom to either a window or to a front door without being seen and identified.
That is so simple and brilliant.
Right? Anyway, like I said, the evidence against Rudy speaks louder than his BS story, which is why on October 28th of 2008, just shy of a year after Meredith's brutal murder, the judge finds Rudy guilty and sentences him to 30 years in prison. Of course, Rudy appeals the conviction, but the court isn't having it. They uphold the verdict, but at the same time, they reduce his sentence to just 16 years.
For good behavior or remorse or what?
Well, according to coverage from Tom Kington in The Guardian, it's because he's young and he has no criminal record. Definitely not for remorse, which in a court context has as much or more to do with the person admitting their role in the crime as it does with being actually remorseful. And Rudy never admits to any involvement in Meredith's death. He has always maintained his innocence. In 2016, Rudy was released from prison. Now, many of you probably heard the name Meredith Kircher before. You might have even heard Rudy Guede's name too. But you haven't heard this story, because this story, the one I just told you today, is not the whole story. It's not even 0.01% of the story. Because the story of Meredith Kircher and her tragic death in 2007 was completely and totally swallowed up by another story, overshadowed by another woman who found herself ensnared in a British tabloid media-driven web of lies about her that completely and totally changed the course of the investigation, the verdict, and her life. That person is, of course, Amanda Knox, Meredith's roommate, who, along with her boyfriend Raffaele, spent 4 years in an Italian prison serving time for a crime where Literally, all of the evidence pointed squarely at someone else, Rudy Guede. I wanted to tell you this story in a new way, in a way that cleared the path between the victim and the actual murderer. But let me tell you, it wasn't easy because the coverage Rudy Guede got from his arrest to his trial to his release pales in comparison to the coverage Amanda Knox got before, during, and after her trial. And even though in 2015, Amanda and Raffaele were both declared unequivocally innocent, not guilty, but innocent by Italy's Court of Cassation, even though the decision included a harsh criticism of the investigation for its many, many mistakes, missteps, and flaws, even though Meredith's real killer was identified, found, tried, convicted, and served his time, somehow it is still Amanda's name that is synonymous with Meredith Kercher's murder, not Rudy's. It's her face we could pick out in a crowd when I bet most of you couldn't even pick out Meredith in a photo lineup. And it's her innocence, all these years later, that people are still questioning. My question is why? I certainly don't know, and I haven't been able to find the answer either. So I decided to ask the person who knows this case and the experience and Amanda better than anyone else in the world. I asked Amanda Knox.
For how insane and worldwide this case became, that it became known throughout many countries, I am still amazed that my name is the one that is most associated with this case because, if anything, I am an absolutely peripheral figure in the events that took place. I just happened to be Meredith's roommate at the time. Meredith had been raped and murdered, and it was brutal and it was horrible. And nobody wanted anyone to walk away from that without being punished. And the mere fact that my name was associated with this brutal crime was enough for people to have trouble unraveling my name from it. And it remains to this day that same problem. When people think of what happened to Meredith, they think of me. They don't think of her. They don't think of the person who actually did this. They think of me.
This episode was made possible by Simply Safe. If you've ever wanted to make your home feel safer, there is no better time than now. This week, our friends at Simply Safe are giving Crime Junkie listeners early access